Here are the 8 stages of car enthusiasm. I'm making this video because of all the participation award wanting folk in my last video, so here we are. Now, if you haven't watched my previous video, go and check it out after this one. Also, hit like and subscribe or whatever and blah 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 blah, intro over, let's go. Here's the table of content. Now, we'll talk about obviously the first one and go up from there. Blossoming. A blossoming enthusiast is someone who just got interested in cars. This phase is the easiest one to enter, but also the easiest one to leave. Watching videos on the internet is not guaranteed to cement long-term interest in a hobby. Lots of non-car people who do enter the blossoming phase temporarily usually do it as a trend. For example, every time a new Forza game comes out, people will just play it, even non-car people, because they're like, ooh, it's the new game, bright and shiny, shoved in my face, and then a few weeks later they drop it. And in that same vein with internet videos, there are tons of rabbit holes on the internet that you can dive into without actually coming out as a full-blown enthusiast. For example, I've watched tons and tons of videos about random subjects like health, for example, that I never really revisit. That doesn't mean I become a doctor or inspired to become one because I've watched videos relating to health. Cars are like that to some people who are just bored and browsing YouTube. They may just be like, oh, today I'm gonna go on a car rabbit hole and learn some about cars. And they do that for a few weeks and then they're like, nah, and then they just leave. The people who do actually gain interest and stay become fledgling enthusiasts. Now, fledgling enthusiasts, they start to prioritize activities related to cars over ones that don't. Now when they play video games, it's not just about trends anymore. They go out of their way to play ones featuring cars. The same thing happens with videos. Now they actually do enjoy watching car videos. It's not just a way to pass time. It's no longer that random rabbit hole that they dived into to play as background noise. It's actually something they enjoy and actively listen and learn to. And then that brings you to the beginner phase. Now, in the beginner phase, if you just bought a car, you are automatically here, but this is only true for United States car guys. Now, the reason I say this is because in the United States, getting a car is much easier than other countries. However, while that does make them temporarily enthusiastic about cars, 90% of them end up becoming non-car people and just using it as an A to B device. In most other places in the world, buying a car is really difficult, so it's considered almost a guarantee that they're going to be a car enthusiast. Like in the Philippines, for example, or most Pacific Islands, even a Honda Accord is really expensive. So even if they bought that, they've reached a decent, respectable level of car enthusiasts. Owning a car in real life is not a requirement for this stage though. The most noticeable transition from fledgling to beginner is that you start to spend more money on car-related activities. So now it's not just always watching internet videos for free or borrowing racing games from your friends. You actually enjoy buying racing games, even playing some obscure indie titles. Maybe you even start to set up your own sim racing gig, and now you're starting to spend a decent amount of money into car enthusiasm. Even if you haven't owned a real-life car yet, I absolutely think you can become a beginner enthusiast. But that is what is the separation. So the internet car guy, in my opinion, is locked from beginner downwards. I will absolutely consider you guys car guys, but in order to reach the amateur phase, you have to get involved with the real life car community. In the past, I constantly talked about car meets because I was a stupid idiot scrub. Now I'm just gonna be honest with you, there are so many real life events you can do, but car meets is just one real life activity. Attending race events, not as like an actual racer, just as a spectator, that counts too. Going go-karting also counts. Going to car shows, that also counts, because car shows and meets are different things, by the way. Any type of real life activity, like even helping your dad, that's another thing I got. A lot of people are commenting like, hey, I come from a somewhat car enthusiast family, my father's a mechanic, I sometimes help him with his car, I don't have a license yet, I'm only 12. Congratulations, despite you only being 12, you are an amateur enthusiast. You are further ahead of some 18 or 19-year-olds who are still in the beginner phase, who still only play racing games. So that's something you should be proud of. Don't think age stops you, don't think not having a license stops you. Where there's a will, there is a way. If you've gone go-karting even just a few times a year, just get involved some way with the real life car community, even going to meets a few times a year. So these aren't like super intense, like as your new routine, just anything that shows that you're finally dipping your toes and making your first waves in real life, that makes you an amateur enthusiast. And then when you actually reach the intermediate phase, this is where you start to become directly involved. So instead of just going to car meets to look at cars, to go to car shows, look at cars, going to race events as a spectator, now you're the person who's submitting your car into the shows, going to the car meets to actually interact with people, or actually racing your car. This is also where I'd like to introduce branching paths, because you don't need to do all three of what I said above to be considered intermediate. A lot of car guys will start to specialize from here on out. People who are show goers usually will build show cars. They're gonna stance cars. To use a video game as an example, you have different classes and different specializations. You also have talent points. During Wrath of the Lich King, you gained a talent point from level 10 onwards. This is kind of true of real life, but instead of levels, think of it as years. The reality of human life is we only have a limited time on this planet. Therefore, I don't expect everyone to be the best at everything. It's perfectly acceptable if you never ever race your car, and you can still be considered an intermediate enthusiast, even a veteran enthusiast. We'll talk about that later. You can also be the opposite side of the fence. You could be someone who races your car so much where you're constantly breaking parts. Every time your part is fixed, you immediately go back on the racetrack, and you never have time to submit your car into a car show because it's never in a good enough condition to be show worthy and win anything. Before we move on to veteran, I'm gonna just do a quick summary of intermediate. So as you can see here, the most important fact is that you do have to own a car in real life at this phase. That might sound daunting or scary or even elitist gatekeeping to some, but the reality of life is that the higher you go up in anything, the more requirements it needs. In the same way that you as a student must go through years and years and years, like first grade, second grade, third grade, so on and so forth till you graduate. That's true of this in the same way that at your job you have to promote slowly before you end up getting like vice president or someday even CEO. No one starts at the top, and I hope this video so far has just helped you guys out to place where you are currently in the car community. In truth, I'm probably preaching to the choir because most of my subscribers, including you amazing few watching currently, are big brain car guys who kind of already understand not to be soft about this. But of course, last video where I had all those super sensitive snowflakes from Twitter who want everything in life to be super easy so they can just be anything they want. Yeah, that's not how this works here in the car community. You do have to earn certain titles. As we move on to the next one in this video, veteran, you'll see that the requirements only get stricter. And that finally brings us to the veteran stage. So the veteran stage is when you're starting to use a lot of these events as routine. So you have veteran showgoers who win tons of awards. They're going to prepare for weeks for an annual event, and they don't really go to small time shows anymore. Then you have veteran racers who don't really go to car meets or shows at all anymore, and they're constantly racing. Then you have veteran mechanics who constantly know how to fix certain platforms of cars not because they're paid to do so, but because that's just what their friends have and what they have, so they're constantly learning about the car. And then you have people who are a little bit of everything, where they still go to car shows, they also do race their car, and they also are somewhat able to work on their car, but they're not super duper good at any one of those particular. Like for example, as a YouTuber, I'm kind of stuck in that situation where I try to dive my toes into a little bit of everything, but I just recently passed the veteran threshold. I started working on my own car as well as helping friends with their cars, so I'm just barely touching the veteran of each one of those, and it's gonna take me a long time, like probably a decade, before I even come close to getting like maxed out, as you would call it, like in a video game, in any one of those categories. Only about 10% of car enthusiasts reach the veteran phase, and that is not something to be sad about, because the higher and higher you go into anything in life, the less and less people will be there, but the closer and closer people will be there. Other veteran enthusiasts are really nice to each other, they look out for each other, and we've been through so much together, because some of the other veteran enthusiasts are people you've grown up with, and like I said, you see who falls off early or who stays at a lower level, because not everyone who doesn't make it a veteran, that doesn't mean you've quit. There are some people who just get comfortable at other levels of enthusiasm. To use an example, I'll actually use another one of my hobbies, anime. I am stuck at I would say below amateur. I'm saying like between beginner and amateur forever. So in the anime community, obviously you have their blossoming interest is just people who just started watching it. Fledglings are people who started to watch more. They start to know certain genres like harems, like shonens and shoujos and so on and so forth. And then you go even further to the beginner phase where they even start to play more anime games. They start to socialize with anime fans online, which is the worst thing ever. And eventually you go towards the real life community, which is anime conventions and other anime events, which I literally just now did this year. So I've just now reached the amateur level for anime fan. Again, due to the fact that in real life, you only have so much time to dedicate to so many things. And after going to anime conventions, I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm probably never gonna advance further, because when you get to intermediate and veteran, you start having people who do like cosplays or people who start to fly out to anime conventions like all the way across the world, and they're really dedicated. They'll have rooms filled with tons and tons of anime merchandise. I'm never gonna get to the level. Like I can't even convince myself to spend more than a few $100s on anime figures, because I was like, yo, this could be car parts instead, because the car enthusiast in me kicks in for that. And that ties back into this video. For all the people who are like, hey Bladed, I'm not gonna make it to veteran enthusiast based on your description. That means you're an evil gatekeeping elitist and I hate you. No, what I just said isn't a bad thing. Think about all the other priorities you have in life. There probably is another hobby you actually love more than cars that is stopping you from becoming a veteran in it, and you should not be ashamed of that. Because like I said, we are mortals. We do not have an infinite amount of time. You will have to dedicate or sacrifice time to make certain hobbies go forward more at the cost of other ones going backwards more. You will never be good at everything, and that's okay. I've chosen cars as the hobby that I will go the furthest in, and at the cost of anime never moving further than the amateur phase, but also because I've become content with it. There are a lot of supercar owners, yes, supercar owners who are not even veteran car guys because they've never turned a single wrench their whole life. They somehow still haven't won any car show awards because okay, having a bone stock supercar, by the way, one of the funniest things about going to car shows is bone stock supercars will lose to built tuners or even stance cars these days because obviously judges, their taste will change based on trends. So it's kind of funny seeing some of my supercar friends still never have an award won yet. They still haven't raced their car yet, and they also don't know how to work on their car. They are not a veteran enthusiast, and this is someone who's saved up for the supercar that they've owned for 10 years and they've been involved with cars for 10 years, yet they're still only at the intermediate phase. That's not a bad thing. That's just called getting comfortable. And some people, when they find a certain point in their hobby, they're just like, this is where I feel the most at home with. You know, they would rather their supercar be worked on by someone else. And we've tried to tell them, hey, step back down to a tuner or buy a tuner as a second car and learn to work on that. And they're like, I still don't want to work on a car because it's just not something I'm interested in. So we learned that some of them genuinely will never hit the veteran phase because of their own decision. And they might have other hobbies. Like one of them I know is really into snowboarding. That's like a totally unexpected other hobby to be in from a car guy, but he's super into it. And he also owns a Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera. But when he's not driving around his Superleggera in summer, he is literally just snowboarding it up. Like he will actually fly cross country to Colorado. He has another hobby that he would rather dedicate time to. So it's not a matter of gatekeeping, it's not a matter of being rude or elitist, it's just the fact of life. You're not always going to make it to the top of something, and you might not even want to, because with how much limited time we have in life, you might want to dedicate it to other things instead. Because if someone told me, hey Bladed, you can finally pierce past veteran and go to professional car enthusiasm, but at the cost of dropping your other hobby, anime, and I'd be like, nah. And that's a decision I think a decent amount of you guys would also make for your other hobbies. Like if in my friend's case, if I told him, hey, quit snowboarding and finally become a veteran enthusiast, he'd probably look at me and be like, nah, you're crazy. I'd rather keep dedicating my time to learning more about snowboarding. I'd be like, you know what, fair enough. Speaking of semi-pro and professional, you probably remember these on the table of contents and how I drew a line between hobbyist and career. Semi-pros and professionals are people who do car-related stuff as a career. Now let's talk about semi-pro. A semi-pro is someone who usually works on cars part-time or just started full-time. While they are technically ranked above veteran because it's a full career to them, that doesn't necessarily mean they're smarter than veterans, because a veteran enthusiast of 20 years who owns like a MR2 is going to know way more about his MR2 than a mechanic who just learned to work on cars in 2 years. However, the semi-pro, because it's their career, will eventually outpace a veteran enthusiast in a matter of a few years, like 5 or 7 years. This is because as veterans, we don't work on cars because we enjoy it, so to speak. We work on them because we have to. Like if my Corvette has any sort of thing that needs maintenance or work being done, I will get to it. But mechanics do not work on cars only when they break. They work on cars because it's their literal career. They clock in 9 to 5, so they spend 8 hours a day working on all kinds of cars. Because again, me as a veteran enthusiast, I only work on cars I like pushrod cars or cars that I've owned. A mechanic, if a car rolls into your shop and you see like an old lady hand you her keys and she's got super sad puppy dog eyes like, please fix my car, I use this to drive everywhere, I need it to run, you're gonna learn to work on it right there and then at the spot, whether you have to be super patient. This is also true of semi-professionals at other things, like for example, racing. People who are semi-pros at racing usually finally got a few sponsorships. They're able to race a lot more. Even my friends who really love racing as hobbyists, so veteran enthusiasts, they only race like once a month at most, so 12 times a year. And that is already really expensive for them. However, semi-pros, because they're sponsored, can race more than that. They can also learn to race more platforms, which means they know more lines, because obviously all-wheel drive cars and rear-wheel drive cars take different lines on certain tracks. So they will learn track tracks quicker, they'll learn more variations of the track, and they'll learn more variations of the lines for the track as compared to someone who's a veteran enthusiast who really only races their own car and stuff they're familiar with. That is the difference between someone who does it for a career versus someone who just does it for fun. Which brings us to the final level, professional enthusiast. A professional race car driver, professional mechanic, or professional car show host. This is the pinnacle, the absolute testament of car enthusiasm. Less than 1% of car enthusiasts will reach this phase, and many of us will never even have a drive to pursue it. I, for example, will just stay in veteran forever. I don't really have a desire to make it a career ever. But people in the professional phase, like with car show host, they have to find booth cars and vendors to stock it, also find food trucks, set up events, set up durations, schedules, and then find people out to reach out to, and of course, ultimately get a show going. So while attending a car show and car meet makes you an amateur, intermediate, and winning awards makes you a veteran, the actual person running the event itself, you have to remember, is a professional. They're literally someone who does it as a career, and they have to know what they're doing, and if something bad happens, it falls on them. Professional race car drivers, similar but different. Obviously, it's a different type of profession, but just as much of the stakes. There's someone who has to do it now as a living. There is nothing wrong with less than 1% of people wanting to do it as a professional career. I'm not saying pros shouldn't exist. I'm saying that pros are just a really hard place to get to, and I'm not saying you shouldn't become a pro. I'm saying that the majority of us don't need to be a pro, but if you want to be a pro, go for it. Thanks for watching, and see y'all next time. Bladed Angel out.